All right, welcome to class, everybody. We're going to try a different lesson format for today's activity. And so we're going to be going over following directions. And in particular, we're going to pay attention to something called sequence, okay? So we use directions every day in our lives, right? When you are going to the store, your parents follow directions to drive there. There's stoplights, there's stop signs that have implicit or understood rules that we have to follow. So directions are kind of like rules, okay? So when you think of directions, I want you to think of the rules or steps that we follow to get things done. All right. So one thing that immediately comes to mind when you're talking about directions is directions to a location, right? You have to follow them to make sure that you get to the correct place. Otherwise, you might get lost and end up where you don't want to be. But directions aren't just listed on a map, okay? Directions also are seen in a lot of different ways. So why do we follow directions? Well, we follow directions so that we can get things done and so that we don't break any rules, right? We want to follow the rules, especially now that you guys are high school students. Here soon, you will be 18, at which point you are legally considered an adult. And so knowing what the directions are for the place that you are at and being able to follow them is really important so that you can hold down a job, so you can live independently, and so that you can function on your own. So we know that directions are steps or rules that I follow to get things done or to go somewhere. But what is sequence? What is sequence? Well, sequence is the order in which something must be done. When you think of sequence, you can think of steps. All right. Steps that follow a linear order. That means they come one after the other, all right? And so sequence and following directions, I mean, that's exactly what you would encounter when you are doing directions to a location, right? You need to go in your car, you plug in the directions into your MapQuest or your car GPS, and it'll tell you the steps that you need to follow to get to your location. All right. Similarly, we follow directions with sequence in a lot of other ways in our everyday lives. One example is cooking. When you follow a recipe has sequence or steps that you have to follow in the order that they are listed. So when you're cooking something, you can't automatically go from cookie dough to a cookie in one step, right? It involves multiple steps that we have to follow in order to really produce the item that you want to create, okay? And oftentimes when you're cooking with recipes, they also call for unique ingredients that you have to use in order to make the food. So not only do you have to follow the proper steps, but you have to have the proper materials and equipment, all right? So if you've ever used a cookbook, if you've ever tried to cook something, which you surely have, at least with us at March Middle, right? We did our cooking segments every week. Then you have followed directions with sequence. You have followed steps in a certain order, 1, 2, 3, 4, first, then, next, last, in order to accomplish something. And let me actually go back to what is sequence, and I'm going to include those sequence words, okay? When you see these words, they're a good hint that you need to follow steps in a certain order, okay? So first, then, next, last, or finally. And they might also be numbered. Sequence, especially when you're doing recipes, it's often numbered. This is also often numbered. All right, so when it's numbered, it makes it easy for us. When it's not numbered and it's sequence words, we really have to look at the word and decide what order it happens in. Thankfully, the recipe or whatever you are following should be written in the sequence that they want you to follow. So I'm not going to tell you last you should do this and then first. They're going to go first, next, then last or finally, okay, depending on how many steps need to be accomplished. So like I said, recipes, that is one way that you follow directions with sequence or with a certain order. Another way is when we do art, all right? Art is part of our academics and leisure. Art activities have a sequence, or they have steps that we must follow in the order they are listed in order to produce what we want. Art activities, like what we do on Wednesday, they also have unique components that we need to use in order to create your end art product, okay? So if you remember from last week, we did our feelings wheel and we had all of the foam pieces. There was a lot of stickers. You didn't need glue actually because the foam sticker, right, you could take off the back and there was adhesive, which you would put down onto the paper. So it's really important when we are doing our art section, our art lessons on Wednesdays, to follow the order, because it's easy to want to jump ahead because you think you know what it should look like, but then you might be forgetting something. And so when you wait for us, when you follow the sequence, when you follow directions in order with your teacher and with your peers, it really helps you get a better understanding of what you're going to produce, okay? So art, that's an example of following directions in academics and leisure. And finally, and perhaps the most important of all for you guys, now that you are in high school, you follow directions during work. Work is part of your employment and independent living, okay? Right now you're a student, so that's the work that you do. But once you're 18, once you're a legal adult, you're going to get a job, right? And so jobs often have sequenced responsibilities that follow a list. So it's tasks that need to be accomplished by a certain time each day. So when you go to work, part of the directions that you follow are arriving to work on time. So if your work starts at 7:30, you're not going to wake up at 7:30. You're going to wake up at 6 or 6:30 to show up at work at 7:30. And then you might have to stock the shelves like this gentleman is doing here in the photo, right? He's probably following a sequence. I start stocking from the top and then I move down, or maybe I start at the bottom and go up. It depends on what his job responsibility list is. You might also need to do things by a certain time. For example, when you work in grocery stores, a lot of times the restrooms need to be cleaned every hour, and you have to check off and write the time that you cleaned the restroom or that you cleaned different surfaces in order to, maximize hygiene. And so making sure that you are following directions in sequence or on time, in this case, the sequence is time of day, really helps you to stay employed, to make a living so that you can function on your own, and just to, have a wholesome and good experience working, right? You might start working here and then transition to somewhere else. So you want to have a strong resume by showing that you can follow directions with sequence. All right. So I will see you guys during your Zoom meeting later today. I hope you have an awesome afternoon and take care. Bye.